嘿，其实我想这个开头想了很久。我本来觉得我一上台就应该讲个故事什么的，要么感人，要么搞笑，就随便煽动一下大家。当然我觉得这个机会还挺难得的，我还想趁这个机会跟大家说一声，就感谢。我在中国这么多年，我还是特别感谢我身边的朋友啊，还是那些陌生人对我的友谊、热情、支持和关照，所以就首先要说一声感谢啊。So I'm an American millennial, 千禧一代. I'm an American millennial. There's 80 million of us. Everyone wants to know who we are, what we stand for, who we're going to vote for, what we want to buy, you know. But again, there's only 80 million of us. There are over 400 million Chinese millennials. Young China #1. On the other side, Young China also means an ancient culture re-emerging as a modern nation, re-emerging with a modern identity in today's world. Young China. When we think about Young China, we often don't consider who China is becoming, who China is going to be. And that's a mistake. Often we look at China, we look at the past. So first, who am I? I'm sure you guys have realized by now that I'm actually not Chinese. I first came to China in 2010 because I was a big fan of science fiction. I figured I could study abroad. I was at Columbia at the time. Figured I could go to Europe and study history, or go to China and see where everyone was saying the future was happening. Now, when you set it up like that, it's a relatively easy decision. I came here in 2012. I didn't speak Chinese. I came with a backpack. I had an address of a hostel. I didn't have a job. I had nothing else. And what I quickly found out was the China I was experiencing was far different than the China that was being described to me. When the media describes China, we usually describe sort of three versions. First, you have the government, which is, you know, scary. First, we have the government, which is scary. Next, we have the macroeconomics, which is exciting. And then whenever the media describes people, it's usually one of extremes. You know, you have super rich, super poor, sort of a Maserati driving, but people still eating dog meat eating population. You have what? You have a ghost town where nobody lives. Or you have overpopulated subways in Beijing where people have to get pushed on. We don't often talk about the normal, the average. So what I'm trying to do is help people outside of China understand what normal life is like here. Because this generation of young China is soon going to be the pathfinders for the emerging China. They're going to be guiding China's modern step onto the modern stage. So again, the question I want to ask everyone here is, how well equipped do you think the world is to understand you? 3个点, 3 points. The first one is progress. Now, everyone understands that China has changed very fast, that China has progressed very fast. But few people think about what that does to one's mindset. How does a culture of rapid change shift the way you see the world? There's an essential question that we don't think about with China. Often when we meet someone in China, we ask, where are you from? You know, Wuhan, Chongqing, Beijing, you know, what have you. We ask where you're from. What we should be asking is when you're from. China changes so fast that rather than which city you're from, north, south, east, west, whatever, what era you're from, what generation you're from, is often your most defining characteristic. This is my dad. 像不像？对。This is my dad in 1969. Now, in 1969, my dad was clearly a hippie. And he was deciding whether or not he should go to Woodstock Music Festival. Does everyone here know what Woodstock Music Festival is? That's Woodstock. So this is America in 1969. Woodstock was best known for 3 things. First, sex. Second, drugs. Third, rock and roll. My dad's decision to go to Woodstock, there's a lot of anthropological wrapping around that decision. You know, he probably had some disposable time. He probably had disposable income. He was probably rebelling against something, right? So you can learn a lot about somebody by their decision whether or not to go to Woodstock. Now, This is a picture that one of my friend's parents helped me choose in China. This is China in 1969. This generation was best known for their ability to 吃苦, to eat bitter, to do difficult things for long periods of time at the prospect of delayed gratification. This generation was not thinking about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So I was born in 1990. This is Shanghai in 1990. My friends were born in Shanghai in 1990. This is the Shanghai they were born to. This is Shanghai in 2015. And so we do a lot of talking where I'm from about generation gaps. My generation is so different than my dad's generation. You know, millennials versus boomers, they're so different. But in reality, you know, (1969, 2016, that's Coachella. China doesn't have generation gaps. China has generation gulfs. We often don't think about what this culture of rapid change does to this generation's mindset. In fact, we can quantify this. So the per capita GDP is a pretty good metric for measuring the quality of a life, right? Per capita GDP. So I'm from the United States. When I was born in 1990, since I was born to today, our per capita GDP has increased 2.5 times in my lifetime, which is pretty good, which means that my parents could afford 2.5 times better tutoring. The trips that we took were maybe 2.5 times longer. The cars that my neighbor drove, maybe 2.5 times better. In China, if you were born in 1990, you've watched your per capita GDP increase 27 times. Maybe it's just a developing country thing, right? India, 5. Germany, 1.9, Brazil 3.2. In fact, when you look at the entire world, the top 70 performing economies in the world, there is only one other country outside of China whose millennial generation has witnessed this much change, and China still ranks #1. By the way, this is Vietnam. An alternate title to this slide could be, what's going on in Vietnam, right? That's like a lot going on. What I'm trying to tell you now is that those of you sitting in this room and those of you outside of this room in China, that the amount of change that you've seen in your lifetime is globally unique. Nowhere else in the world is like it. And what I'm trying to tell everyone outside of this room, when you look at Chinese millennials, when you look at Chinese young people, and you just kind of want to treat them like, you know, American millennials, but with different haircuts, we've lived different lives. Second point. The project of childhood. What is a childhood for? You know, there are a few stereotypes about Chinese kids. Little emperors, 小皇帝. They are test monsters, 考试怪物. They are insular. And what else? That they're what? What are some other stereotypes about Chinese kids? Often we underestimate this young generation's ability to think innovatively, right? I'm going to tell you a story about a young man named Jianguo. In 2013, I was a teacher. This picture was actually taken exactly 1 year after I moved to China. No, exactly 1 year after I graduated from college. And as a teacher, you know, if we think that young people in China, particularly young kids, are little emperors, then I'm clearly the court jester in this metaphor, right? So this was kind of hard for me. I was a teacher at a technology school, at a school that also taught young people robotics. So my class was full of 6 5-year-olds, and Jianguo was one of them. I initially thought that Jianguo was going to be spoiled, but as class went on, you know, he was just a normal kid. He was curious, he was excited, he worked well with others, and it would have been an entirely normal class were it not for the fact that at the back of the classroom, for those 6 children in the classroom, there were 12 parents and 24 grandparents at a glass partition watching every twist of a microscope, every punch of a keyboard. After class, I went out and I heard Jianguo on the side of the room crying. I went over to see what's going on, and I see around Jianguo, his grandparents are patting him on the back and arguing. His dad is looking confused on the side. And his mom and his grandmother are showing him flashcards. Microscope. Amoeba. Keyboard. They're all the words that we learned that day in class. I asked his mom, you know, what's going on? I didn't assign any homework. And she said, Jianguo is going to have to take the Gaokao, the college entrance exam, in 13 years. I'm trying to give him the edge. You know, we have this idea of little emperors because of China's inverted demographic pyramid, right? We think of that system, the 4-2-1 system, 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 child, as a funnel for love, for attention, for resources. In the West, we don't also think about how this is also a funnel for pressure. Think about being little Jianguo in the room with 4 grandparents, 2 parents, watching your every move. A lot of that pressure is directed at study. This is one of the other stereotypes, right? We have this idea that Chinese kids can only study, that they're insular, that they only work amongst themselves. But even that's changing. What's so interesting about this young generation in China is that most of them can actually speak English. I think we have this idea of China outside of China, that this young generation has never been exposed to the outside world, that the internet, that they can't see beyond their world. When in reality, my friends in China are far more fluent in the outside world than we are in China. You know, I have friends who can quote Martin Luther King Jr. and Barney from How I Met Your Mother in the same sentence. There's a comfort and culture, there's a comfort in outside culture that frankly the West lacks in China. 1/3 of all study abroad students in the United States come from China currently. It's a generation who's broadly exposed to the outside world. This is an interesting line, 摸着石头过河. It means crossing the river by feeling the stones. Deng Xiaoping said this to describe China's modern economy post-1980s. This was China's way of dealing with the changes in the world. It's a beautiful way of saying that I don't really know exactly what I'm doing. You know, my eyes are closed and I'm trying to cross the river of time and history, feeling stone by stone, trying to find steady purchase. But it also embodies what's happened in China over these last few years. There's a culture of such rapid change that this young generation, if nothing else, has learned to adapt. This culture of incredible change means this young generation has to adapt. And what that means is they've also had to learn how to adopt. There's this idea of Chinese young people that they're not innovative. Instead of asking, is this young generation innovative? We should be asking, are they adaptive? Can they adapt to the modern world? And I think looking here, we can see we can. Again, this stereotype, is China innovative or not? Think about how much they've had to change. Think about how much you've had to change in your lifetime just to keep up with the times. In China, we say, 计划赶不上变化, 对吧? The plans can't keep up with the changes. Because everything changes so fast in China, this is one of the most adaptive generations in the world. This is an interesting point. Cultural gravity. What do I mean by that? Well, first I want to talk about pride. This young generation is incredibly proud. When I show this slide outside of China, people usually tell me that they think that this generation, that this group of young people, the first thing that they think of is brainwashed. Seriously. And then I tell them a story. So in 1996, my friend Tom, he was born in 1990 in Sichuan, just outside of Chengdu. And he tells me that the very first time he saw America was in 1996 at the Olympics. This was the Olympics in Atlanta. He went to his neighbor's house and his mom points to the TV screen and says, look, there's America. It's the greatest country in the world. That year, the United States won 44 gold medals and China won 16. Now in 1996, China was still a relatively poor country. So 16 gold medals was already a coup for that group of people. Now if you fast forward to 2008, Tom is now 18. He watched the Beijing Olympics. The Beijing Olympics is now known as the greatest show that mankind has ever put on Earth in the history of the entire human species. That year, China won, I believe, 51 gold medals, and the United States won 36. So how much is a gold medal worth? Not much. But what about the price of pride? This young generation has seen so much change in their lifetime. You guys have seen so much evidence around you. You know, I think when we imagine China's rapid growth, we imagine something very abstract. outside of China. But when you're here, it's hard not to imagine, your uncles, your aunts working harder so they can get a new apartment. You've watched your city evolve around you. It's a personal change. We often think about something that's being pushed by the government, not pushed by the people. And if you've grown up here, and time and again, this is something that's been told to me, if you've seen the change yourself, it's a personal change, and it's something you can feel proud of. Now, that's not to say that this young generation doesn't have an understanding that there are flaws in China. I actually want to make that really clear. A lot of people always ask me, well, China's clearly not perfect. Of course China's not perfect. One of the interesting things, because of this young generation is so exposed to the broader world, there's more recognition that rather than believing that the West was as perfect as they were told when they were young, increased exposure has actually led to less admiration for what they used to believe was the city on the hill. Young people here are beginning to recognize that, okay, China's not perfect, but nobody's perfect. Nowhere's perfect. And at least they've been a part of creating something they can believe in. In the West, we do something that I refer to as the Shanghai fallacy. A lot of foreigners come to China, they go to Shanghai, they eat a steak, right? They have a glass of wine, they look out on the Bund, they speak with their English translator, they go home and they think, for China, modernization means westernization. In reality, Shanghai is the least representative in China. My last point comes to the idea of cultural gravity. If Shanghai is the least representative in China, if the rest of China is evolving in its own way, that means that everyone here has a new question to ask. How does China want to impact the world? Since really the end of World War II, since around 1945, as a country has modernized, they've typically westernized. The United States in particular created a world system, even if it's economic, if it's government, what have you. They created a world system that as countries modernize, they usually fall into our cultural gravity. They fall into our orbit. What's so interesting about China right now, and particularly this young generation, is there's so many people, there's so much economic and political impact that China, for the first time ever in the East, could be a power for what's called Easternization. China is becoming so strong that for the first time ever, there's enough cultural gravity here that China can begin to impact the way that our world spins. So the question I have for everyone here is, what do you want to stand for? When I give this speech or when I talk to people outside of China, what they always ask me are, what are Chinese values? What does this young generation believe in? How are they going to impact the world? People don't know. Honestly, people don't know. And that's why a lot of people are scared. So my question and my challenge for all of you is to start to think about that. If China really is, if Easternization really is going to be a process that begins, that starts to impact the rest of the world, what do you want to stand for? What do you want to represent? And for the rest of the world, again, I'm going back to this original question. How well prepared are we to understand young China? Thank you.